Thank you everyone for joining us today. And I think we still have a few people coming in, which is great. My name is Courtney Downs. I work at Kentucky Youth Advocates. And I also work very closely with Tanya and with Ashley, who will be helping to facilitate today with the Face It movement. Before we jump in, I wanted to share with you all, kind of give you all a sneak peek of a new brochure that we have coming out before we hop into the panel. So let me see if I can, should have had this set up and ready to go. All right. Are you all able to see that? Okay. So this is really just like a sneak peek for everyone. We're going to, I'll let Tanya share a little bit more about this in just a minute, but I wanted to at least share with you guys kind of like the shell of what we have here. We're going to do like a full press release in a couple of weeks, and we're actually in the process of finishing the touches on a web page that is going to accompany this and have a lot of different links for families to tap into. So let me see if I can show you the next page because it's pretty big. So each section, or the mnemonic that we're using is connect, and so each section will have some different information on there. And then wanted to show you the back as well. So Tanya, was there anything you wanted to?
Yeah, so just really quickly, so this is a really a partnership that we forged with funding from the CDC. So Face It, I am with Pediatric Forensic Medicine at UK, and then Ashley Bush is with Caseman. And so there was some really great funding that came from the CDC to roll out a really nice toolkit for families and other service, kind of social service workers and agencies to use during public health emergencies. And so, one of the things I think we hear a lot about children experiencing adversity, but we really wanted to focus on families being able to build resilience, right? So, as a social worker, I really try to focus on the strengths that our families are bringing to the table. And so, if we can build on those strengths and then help them build that resiliency, we wanted to have a nice place, just kind of a one-stop shop where they could tap in to really think about unique and quite simply, just really simple ways to build resilience. And so I don't think you can see it on the brochure maybe just yet, but there's going to be a QR code on the back of that. And so they can scan that QR code and it's going to take them to a website and they're going to be able to access resources by county. Which is going to be really great. And it's going to be a work in progress. So I'm not going to tell you that tomorrow you're going to be able to click on that and get resources by county. But I think, living in Lexington and maybe those of you who are joining maybe from Louisville, our families have access to a lot of resources, but we also remember that there are 118 other counties in this state. And so to be able to have all of those resources in one spot, we were hopeful that families would really be able to use those. So now you guys are in the know, something that most of the Commonwealth doesn't know, so you're welcome. And when it finally rolls out, you'll be able to say, oh yeah, I knew about that, and really be able to push it. So.
That's all right. So
Thanks, Courtney.
Sure, of course. Thank you for all your hard work on it. Okay, so just as a general reminder before we get into our panel, we are going to be recording today's forum, and we'll also share that later on as a video and a follow-up email with everyone. So if you know anyone who wanted to join but wasn't able to, you can share it with them, or you can just share it with your networks as you see fit. And then we also ask that you stay muted. We are taking questions and comments via the chat feature, so please continue to use that throughout. And if we're able to get to some of those questions, then we will, but if we can't, then we will always follow up with you via email later on. So with that, then I will turn it over to Tanya again to get us started with the panel.
So again, I want to thank you all so much for joining us today. A huge thank you to our panelists who are joining us. And I think just really quickly, I'm actually just going to let each panelist introduce his or herself. They can probably talk about their amazing accomplishments a little bit better than I can. So Ebony, can we start with you?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. It's actually a pleasure to be here, having this conversation. I'm currently the interim executive director at Nativity Academy at St. Boniface. I'm also the founder of Making Changes Together, which is a social service consulting business that I've actually worked with Bounce Coalition and have done a ton of things around adverse childhood experiences. And my background is in social work. So I always appreciate those who are having this conversation around how do we support kids and families. So thank you for having me.
Thanks, Ebony. Stephanie, do you want to go next?
Sure. So my name is Stephanie Spires, and I am a member of the Fayette County Board of Education. I'm also a foster adoptive mother, and I own a coaching and consulting business that works with foster families and adoptive families, as well as with organizations, churches, school districts, and such that support these foster and adoptive families. So it is my honor and privilege to be here. So thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Chet, you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Chet Jenkins. I'm a teacher, a business teacher at Paul Lawrence Dunbar High School. I've been there for this my 12th year. At Dunbar, I was at Woodford County High School for 5 years before that. Then I was a special education teacher at Bondurant Middle School in Frankfort. So I'm glad to be here.
Thanks, Chet. Sydney.
Hey, so I'm Sydney Lawson. I am a social service specialist for the Cabinet for Health and Family Services on the Child Protection Branch. One of my main focuses is the human trafficking program for the CPS. But before I got into this role, I was a frontline child protective service worker in numerous counties.
Thank you, Sydney, for joining us. And lastly, Chelsea.
Hi, I am also a social service specialist with the Child Protection Branch in DCBS. And my current role is I am the specialist that works for our safety model that Kentucky is in the process of implementing statewide, which is kind of reforming how we do business as workers and how we're hoping to engage our families even more than we do now in working on our policies and procedures with that. Prior to this role, I was also a frontline worker in multiple counties. The Frankfort area is where I most primarily have worked. And I started with the cabinet in 2014. So we're excited to be here and hopefully answer some questions for everyone.
Great. Thank you guys so much. So we've got a lot to cover. Thank you to the attendees who sent in some questions. So I think we're going to be able to have a really great conversation today to kind of talk about how we support families and school personnel and the students that we are all serving. So with that, I'm curious to know, what skills do you all feel that you've identified to help you spot barriers to kind of learning in the classroom, in person, or during NTI? And so those barriers may be issues of hunger, housing insecurity, racism, family violence. Whoever wants to take it first.
I guess I'll go since I'm the teacher. And I'm in the classroom all the time. It's kind of aimed at me. In the classroom, trying to identify where, if kids are having problems. A lot of times it's with attendance, it's with how they're performing in the classroom. A lot of times you'll see that they're sleeping. You'll go around and one kid will work one day, then come back in, and that next week will sleep pretty much every class, and you wake him or her up, and they get up, and then they go back to sleep. So usually that's a telltale sign that there's something else going on. And since I'm in high school, it's probably not the first time that this has been identified. So I can generally go talk to somebody, counseling office, social worker, administration, and see what's going on. And usually I'm saying 99% of the time it has already been identified. Online, different animal. They're not showing up. That's the only way that you can really identify it. I have my students turn on their cameras because I want to see, eye contact, see if they're understanding what I'm talking about. But some kids don't turn their cameras on. Some kids turn it on but point it up at the ceiling, so you don't know what they're doing, and it's hard to do it. It's hard to really identify anything. Now, when they're not showing up to class, we have where I can talk to different people and say, hey, I've called home, I've talked to the student, I've talked to the parents, but then they show up, they might show up for one day. And that's really the only way we can identify it, is just through attendance. And it's tough because all of us, all teachers, we thrive on relationships with our students. That's why we got into teaching. And we don't get that feedback that you usually get because everybody's scared to unclick that mute button or unclick where you can see them, their camera. So it's really, really difficult right now to identify those things. And when we go back to school, I really think there's going to be a lot of things that are going to come up. And I'm done.
I think I'll just add to, what Chet was saying about the difficulty in, identifying some of these things, virtually versus in person. First, let me start by saying that Nativity is a small independent middle school here in Louisville. And, our size is actually a plus. In that, relationships is the skill that we've been able to, really use to help, identify some barriers that might exist. So relationships with the students first, so that they understand how important it is for them to be engaged and committed to their education. And so through the relationships, we're able to, and like I said, one more time, for the small size of our school, have teachers who can easily identify when something's not quite right, and reach out directly either to that student or to that family, and just lift those concerns. I would also say the roles that we have here to support our students and families are extremely helpful. We have an academic support coordinator. We have a dean of students. And then, of course, the frontline teachers are able to, pick up when something isn't right, doesn't seem, and we're curious and we care. And so we leverage those relationships to reach out to mom. Hey, and so, for example, if a student isn't logged on and visible, then the teachers will message the dean, and the dean will reach out to the parent. And sometimes the parent is at work, let's just be honest. But that parent can get a hold of their child and say, what's going on? You should be on class. And so therefore, it is the relationships that we have with our students and parents that, afford us the ability to tap into some of the issues that they're facing. And gratefully so, because we do have families who let us know that they are hungry, that they're experiencing some challenges. And when they share that with us, of course, we respond either directly or with referral services so that they can get the support that they need.
So I'll jump in a little bit from the DCBS side, not necessarily the education side, but from our window, when we're involved with a family, it means that we're statutorily mandated to be involved. So there's already been a referral made and a worker has either gone out to the home for an in-person contact or currently, depending on the scenario, has that virtual contact. So from a virtual side of things right now, it is difficult. And I know we'll talk about that some more today, but really for us, it's engaging all aspects of the family. So a part of our training for frontline workers is when you're working with a family and a referral comes in for violence. So that's really the reason that you're involved, but that's not the only thing that we're going to talk about. So talking to our workers and really training our workers around the engagement of, number one, just being understanding and being friendly to people. That's really having the understanding just to be nice and to be understanding of that sometimes when we're involved that day that we walk into somebody's life, that might be the worst day of their life. And to knowing that and having open communication about that is really big, because when you go in and sit down with a kiddo and you're talking to a kiddo about violence, you also need to have conversations around what'd you do this morning? What's the first thing you did when your feet touched the floor? And really opening the line of communication to let the worker know what that kiddo's life is like from sun up to sundown. So that's a tiny touch of where we come from. On the virtual side, I know our workers are trying lots of different avenues to engage with kids, and it is very difficult. But really open-ended conversations and questions with kids through that virtual contact is our biggest support right now.
All right. So to kind of follow up on that a little bit, I'm wondering kind of what are some successful strategies that you all have seen kind of in your everyday work, you know, as a parent, right, and helping kids navigate inside the school, outside the school. How do you get in touch with families, right? Like, you know, I think it's hard. We do have parents who are working. Like, parents can't stop working to stay home and homeschool their children, right? And some of us are working with children screaming in the background, maybe right now, or, you know. And so how do you get parents to be involved? What are some of those really good strategies that you've been able to use?
So I don't know if it's about getting parents involved, but as a small business owner, a community volunteer, and the mother of children with special needs, you know, I have really advocated to families to give themselves grace and to not fight it. If your child is not feeling the Zoom, it's okay to shut down the Zoom. It's okay to walk away. They're not going to flunk first grade because they walked away from a Zoom. And you know, if they can't get on the testing, that's okay. We can get on the testing another day. Like, these are not the biggest issues. And then really advocating that your mental health right now is the most important thing. And I mean, your whole health, and that includes your mental health, is really what was said. I mean, we're all trying to avoid COVID, but at the same time, we really need to take care of our mental health. And so if we need to take a mental health day, you know, one of the things I did with my children is I signed us up to volunteer as puppy transports. And so we've missed a couple days of school because we've gone and rescued puppies in far eastern Kentucky and brought them back to central Kentucky into some of the things. But that was something that's allowed my children to have a outing. It's a safe COVID family thing we can do, but it's given us all a kind of a breathing space and kind of something. So, you know, that's, you know, again, I don't think that quite answers your question, but that piece that I've just impressed upon parents is give yourself grace and take care of your mental health. And anytime I've given interviews, I've really tried to reiterate it, especially in Fayette County, that our schools have resources and have mental health professionals in every single one of our schools that have resources and referrals, not just for students, but also for parents and families. So if you are overwhelmed or you need assistance, you know, contact your school and they will be able to help make those connections for you.
That's so awesome, Stephanie. I did that with my 5-year-old who's in kindergarten as well. Just, you know, can you imagine a kindergartner being on the computer for so long? So we called it Fun Fridays. Like, we're not logging on to school on Fridays, just period. So, you know, we did give ourselves, you know, that time to just, you know, kind of just be. And that's important because I agree with Stephanie wholeheartedly. It is a matter of mental health being the priority, and giving our young people the opportunity to just unplug and not be in front of a computer. It's a lot. It's a lot for me, and I'm grown. So imagine, you know, these young people who are, you know, having to be on the computer all day. But to answer your question, it really is about consistent communication, and then like meeting families where they are, in terms of keeping parents and families engaged and involved along the way. So we'll email, the principal emails, she sends videos, we're in the remind system. So they're constantly getting communication that meets them, wherever they are. And we're, sending surveys and constantly asking, how things going, are you comfortable with sending your student to school? Can we try a hybrid model? We're really fortunate in that, we're inviting our parents to partner with us in figuring out the best educational option, and while keeping safety first, right? We want everybody to, feel like this is the best way for them to support their child through their education. And so I would say that it is the communication piece that is consistently giving us, the parental engagement and feedback that we need to make sure we're doing things the best way we can during these times.
And I think that the same way the parents, when you take like that Friday, or if you take off, the biggest thing is just to communicate it to the teachers, because the teachers are working so hard and they are just as stressed as you are, maybe arguably more. I mean, but be respectful of them enough to engage them in the process. And maybe if something's not working, work together on a strategy. For one of my children, we decided, he just needs to be pulled into breakout rooms every so often and checked on. And then he can come back to the Zoom. And that's something where it was actually the school and I worked together to think something's not working, but there should be an easy fix. Let's think about it. So that communication goes both ways. And parents, don't be afraid to speak up and advocate, because if you don't advocate, no one else is. I mean, so we want to hear from families.
I'm a father of 2 high school kids and a middle school kid, also a teacher. So I have at any point in time 4 or 5 people on Zoom a day. And I can see all different, because they're, at 2 different schools now, and I'm at a different high school. And I can see how different people do it. I can really only speak about what we do at Dunbar. And our principal has done an absolutely amazing job of communicating to us to not overwhelm our students. We have found that, especially when this all started way back in the end of the last school year, that we had a lot of kids that were really overwhelmed, and what they were doing was basically getting overwhelmed and then just shutting down. And it was tough, and we didn't feel like we were doing our jobs, because we have a curriculum we got to go through, and we weren't going through that curriculum, and it was really tough, and it was depressing, and you felt like you weren't the same person that you were before. And so we've taken the approach this year of, and a bunch of different schools have done it, of Wednesdays, kind of that mental, get yourself back into mental order on Wednesdays, getting caught up on stuff, having tutoring sessions. We have, and actually Ms. Bates, I saw came on here a little while ago, is in charge of our CCR days, our SEL, social emotional learning. And we go through and do that for 1 hour a day. And the rest of the day is really just for them to do their makeup. I've also found through my classes, and I'm kind of in a unique position because I have some really good students with my pathway that I work with this year, and I'm so lucky that it happened this year. Most of the kids that I've had them already. They were with me last year for another class, and they're in their 2nd year, or they're in another class, or in their 3rd year, and they already have a relationship with me. And so I know the kids who work hard, and I know the kids that kind of try to find that loophole and get things done the shortest way possible. But I've also instilled this COVID careness, which is, if I see that you're missing an assignment, we're giving extra time for them to turn it in. We've limited down the amount of work that they have to do. And then as a parent to my kids and all my students, I've said, be organized. Sit down, write down. I know as high school kids, an agenda is something that is forbidden. You can't go through an agenda. Oh, that's so elementary school and middle school. I'm not doing a stupid agenda. Get an agenda, write it down. Just write down what we did in every class. You have 4 classes a day. Write down what the outcome was for that day, what we expected for you to turn in and due dates. And instead of you trying to remember all that and freaking out that you forget something, because procrastination is kind of killing a lot of the kids with, oh my goodness, what have I done? What have I not done? I can't figure out, am I supposed to turn this in today or tomorrow? But if they have that agenda, it is, even though I know high school kids don't want to be seen with it, it has been a huge plus for my students that started using it.
Great, thank you guys. So I firmly believe in mental health days for all people, right? Like that's something that I've always encouraged my employees in the past to take. Sometimes we have to do that for our kids too. But, I'm curious though, and some of our attendees were curious too, virtual learning is hard, right? Some families just don't have access to good internet. Some families can't sit and stay at home, right? Work from home is not an option for them, and so they can't kind of monitor what their kids are doing all day. So when I specifically thinking about like school social workers and guidance counselors, especially when kids aren't showing up for school, right, and they're not participating, and you've tried to communicate, at what point does that become like a referral, especially in this day? Like what point does that become a referral to CPS for maybe issues of truancy or like educational neglect? Kind of how have you guys handled those kinds of situations?
So I'll jump in.
Go on. I was going to say, just on my end, I have made a lot of referrals first to our school social workers to have a check-in with the family if I see something that is alarming. And then I trust them to then take it to DCBS. So DCBS, if you want to take it over here.
That's kind of where I was going to start, actually, is from my perspective, my recommendation would first be to seek services through the school system, because sometimes our hands are a little bit tied when it comes to the DCBS side, because there's certain regulations and laws that we have to follow that meets that threshold of when it becomes neglect. So first and foremost, educational neglect is not something that the school is doing. It's what the parent is prohibiting that causes the neglect. So that's a really key piece. It also states in the regulation that the school has to exhaust its efforts before we can even step in. And then once we do, or I guess once the referral is made, we also have to see that the demonstration that the lack of education or the lack of participation in school or wherever it falls is actually negatively impacting the child. So we get calls all the time about truancy or so many days, especially right now with the virtual platform of children not attending school. But until we know that that parent or caregiver is prohibiting and causing that neglect, which therefore negatively impacts the child, then it actually doesn't meet the threshold for CPS to become involved. So really it's really complicated, and some people don't always get, well, they're not going to school, why can't somebody step in? But legally, we can't step in until it meets that criteria.
Could the question be repeated? I think I missed part of that. Heard your answer, but just want to be sure that I understand what that question was. I'm involved as a case manager working in community resources with young people, specifically from 18 to 24. So we do have some perspective, insight as to this situation with young people and their engagement in the education. So
sure.
what,
So we were kind of. Oh, sorry. So we were kind of talking about at what point, if kiddos are not being engaged in school, they're not attending, right? We can't get them to log on to NTI, or especially NTI right now for a lot of our school systems, or in person. At what point does that become something that would be reportable as a truancy issue or something like that? So,
school social worker here. As far as that, if I do a home visit and nobody calls me back and the parent has not been contacting the teacher, and I see that the teacher's been documenting that they've been trying to call, and I do the home visit and nobody calls me, then I refer it to DPP. And then they do a home visit, and then they let me know if they were contacted by the parent. And then we just kind of go from there. But really, during the pandemic, like, people are so affected by this that we have no idea. No idea. I came across a mom and her son had over 50 days. He's in elementary school. And I said, what's going on? And she bawled. Her oldest son had COVID and was put on a ventilator. He was in the hospital for 17 days. And then as soon as he gets home, the middle son, he tried to kill himself. So she had to put him in the ridge. And then her husband's hours got cut because of COVID. And she had to step it up.
Miss Moore, I'm sorry. I don't mean to cut you off, but we're on like a kind of a tight time frame.
Sorry, but I'm just...
It's totally fine. And if you want to, what we can say is, like, if everyone just stays muted, if you have like any questions, comments, feel free to put those in the chat and then we can follow up. But we just want to be mindful of our panelists' time, and we only have 25 more minutes.
Yeah, just want to tell everybody it is a case-by-case situation. And we don't know what the pandemic's doing to these families either, so.
Okay, thank you. So feel free though, like I said, to put everything in the chat.
all right, great.
Go ahead, Tanya.
Oh, no, you go ahead, Ebony, you're good.
I was going to say, I do appreciate Ms. Moore's comments in that, every situation is completely different. And, when I heard the question, I cringed because I'm like, never should we be calling CPS for educational neglect during a pandemic. Okay, in a regular situation, maybe, but in this particular situation, I think that we are all doing the best that we can. And I think that everything that everybody else said was spot on. Stephanie, Chelsea, it's a matter of making sure you've exhausted all other possibilities and make sure that, we've done step A through Y before we take it to a level of involving anybody who then would add additional stress to an already very stressful situation.
Yeah, that's perfect. I think what Stephanie said a few minutes ago about providing grace, we have to do it for ourselves and for everyone all around right now because it's incredibly difficult. So this may be a good question for Chelsea and Sydney to kind of start with, but what, we do see lots of things in people's lives right now when we're on Zoom meetings, maybe some things that we don't always want to see. We learn things about our coworkers and friends that we didn't want to know. So when you're kind of sitting in the classroom, right, and you're thinking about, gosh, I see something in the background going on, or there are always different people coming in and out of the house, or you just see some situations that maybe cause alarm. I guess, what are some of those things that we should be kind of looking for to make sure that our kids are okay, right? I mean, we know that reports of child abuse and neglect have gone down during this pandemic. That is not because COVID cured child maltreatment in the state of Kentucky, right? Like, those are not correlated. What we know is that we just can't see things, right? We're not getting that face-to-face time with kiddos and noticing that. So I'm wondering if you can kind of give us some pointers of things to look for. And to also keep in mind that not everybody's house has to look like ours, right? Not all of those things. It doesn't have to be just the way we are at home, but what are some concerns that we should kind of have on our radar?
So some of the things that we tell people to look for is perishable food sitting out call after call after call. does the children or the family members you do see, do they look like they're malnourished or losing weight? Because we do all need to understand that homes during this time is probably not going to look like what they normally would have when kids are outside, when kids are at school, when kids are not running around the house. And so understanding that difference is a big key. But like you said, or like we said, another thing you can look for is there any presence can you see of rodents or any kind of infestation that could be detrimental to the child's health? Sorry, I'm trying to find some of the other. So another example, and this is kind of tricky. So I'm pulling some of these examples out of the report to court training that we've been doing. Are there any guns or weapons you can see within the background? Now this gets tricky because there's a difference between a gun safe, which could be deemed a safety factor, and then an actual weapon being laying out within reach of the child, which could be a safety threat. Paraphernalia, drugs, those sort of things. Do you see any evidence of that in the background?
And I'm just going to piggyback on what Sydney was saying. One of the things that we've been talking, Sydney and I do a lot of trainings called Report to Court, and which really are to introduce individuals of what happens throughout the life of a CPS case, and kind of what to expect and why we do what we do. But some of the things that our workers have been doing to really engage kids, especially because that's our number one, that's where we know if something is happening, is our communication with our kiddos. So for that virtual side and trying to engage those kids, we talked about a lot of different games to play, which sometimes can be super awkward and awkward in a way of it's difficult to play games over FaceTime, but there's lots of apps that connect with Zoom and different other things. But other things that we talked about is playing something as simple as I Spy with a kiddo. And so they pick something in their house that you can't see because you're not being able to see everything around, but then they have to take you around the house with their iPad or their whatever device they're using. And really not only does that let you interact, because kids talk more when they're having fun. They're going to be easier to engage with when they're doing something and keeping themselves busy, but it also gives the worker or the community partner, whoever's trying to have that engagement, an opportunity to truly see inside their life, and make a note of what those observations are, because it's okay to see a home that's in disarray. It's okay to see clothes on the floor because we don't have enough money this month because the pandemic and our waters got cut off. So if you see those kind of things and you can ask those questions, then that might be an indicator for service referrals or ways that we can assist the family. But until you get those kids up walking around, especially if you're not able to go in the home, you're not going to be able to see those things.
So for those of you who maybe have kids in the classroom, maybe Ebony or Chet, Stephanie hearing things through the school board, have you heard of maybe some really good or things that you've done yourself, things that teachers and school staff are doing to kind of identify those issues and pass those along? Again, not to punish, right? But to provide that really good support, because more than anything, that's what people need right now.
Once again, I'm with high school kids, and I think they already know my address because they sent me notes here and there, thank you notes, and I think they would drive to my house if I was to have them do some things in the classroom. I know that I've seen and heard of elementary school teachers doing some really inventive stuff. Middle school, you kind of get into that where they're doing some different things. But in my classroom, I'm teaching technology. The really only thing that they share is we do, they'll make a website and it'll be about themselves and other people will see it and stuff like that. But I don't really do any really inventive things because they probably would not, they'd probably take me out, to tell you the truth, if I was to go through and have them doing jumping jacks or something in the background. But no, elementary school teachers, I've heard a lot of things, but nothing really that I've heard out of the high school.
So I'll add this, and it's definitely more of a personal note rather than from my job, but my nieces, they're in high school and they love social media and are just sassy as can be. And one of the things that they have shared with me is that they make like a TikTok video or something, but it has to be about what their favorite thing has been doing while they're at home. So one of them is really big into gymnastics, and so she had a TikTok video, and so that just was a small thing that they shared with me that I thought was neat. But I'm going to preface this with I hate social media and I hate TikTok, so I don't know how big that would be for the educator side. So it's pros and cons, however you want to look at it.
What was the question again, Tanya? I was so caught up in Chelsea and these TikToks.
In her TikTok. No, it's just kind of wondering, are there any really good, maybe creative ways that even your teachers at Nativity have been able to kind of spot issues and to be able to wrap families kind of up in support? Because I do think it's a fine line, right? And you don't want to alienate a family, right? Because I think that's always our biggest concern, is that when we ask them if they need help, we're gonna alienate them, right? But what we really want to foster is it's okay to ask for help, like this is normal. And so what have your teachers been able to do?
So I know that, we're real big on, social emotional learning. I know that one of the things that our teachers are kind of cued in is that they spend a great deal of their time just, having general conversation, casual, allowing the interaction to happen between the students and making sure that they allow a little time each day, especially at the beginning in the morning, where all of our students can, see each other, kind of just be kids for a second with no, agenda. And so when you think about social emotional learning, there have been a couple of instances where a student will have a meltdown, around like getting something wrong, and you're like, okay, it's okay, don't worry about that. And so, any of those kinds of cues, our teachers are able to, kind of turn over to our dean of students and say, hey, I thought that this was real strange, can you, kind of check, and after our dean reaches out to the parents, you'll find that, there's been a loss of life, one of our students had lost their big brother. And so, some of these things are, of course, totally understandable. But I think that our teachers have been able to kind of, pay attention to some of these behaviors that, like I said in the earlier question, are not really how they've been acting or, how they've been showing up in the Zoom class. And so anything that seems a little off, of course, you just, you kind of leave room for doubt, but we err on the side of caution in saying that, if something doesn't seem right, we definitely want to just reach out and check, like, hey, just check in, notice that, so-and-so, they weren't as engaged today as they were yesterday, or, didn't turn in their assignments, and they've been on top of it. And so just wondering, what's going on. And so I will say that that's been creative. And, part of working with families from diverse backgrounds is really understanding, to your point, Tanya, every home doesn't look the same. And I think that, if the student is on and their faces, we're able to see their face, some of those identifying things that'll, kind of shoot up a red flag are, marks, bruises, things that, you should automatically pay attention to. But other than that, like, it's invasive. We're all in each other's homes, and, we're not going to ask you to take your iPad, show me your bathroom, that kind of thing. And so, but to Chet's point, I thought it was very interesting that you said something about jumping jacks. Our PE teacher, for somehow, big shout out to all the teachers across Kentucky, well, across the world, really, because it is a really hard job to engage students virtually. But our PE teacher has found ways in which they're doing challenges. Chelsea, if you think about TikTok, like that is the TikTok challenge, and so those kinds of fun ways to engage middle and high school students, seems to be fun. If I insert my young kindergartner, she had a reading buddy for high school, and so they were doing show and tell, and so show me something new you got, or show me what you got for Christmas, that kind of thing, and so I think that we have to remember how we were when we were, as young as these young people are, and just kind of meet them where they are and find something interesting to, talk about, and, continue to build those relationships. Because when you have a relationship with your student, and I'm pretty sure Chet just said, they're sending thank you letters to him. So I'm like, ooh, you must be real good. But when you have that kind of relationship with your students, they will tell you, they'll let you know. When you have that kind of relationship with their families, they'll call, hey, we're hungry. Y'all got some extra food. We're already, preparing meals for our families, for pickup. And so it's a matter of, hey, do you have any extra? And so sometimes it's those kinds of relationships. And so finding fun, engaging ways to build that relationship sometimes is the world of a difference.
I'd like to just kind of step in that a lot of times teachers, when people start asking what kind of inventive ways do you engage with your students, a lot of teachers are trying to think of all these crazy things that nobody's ever heard about before. And I stay far, far, far away from TikTok, very far. I would no. But the simplest thing is I'm lucky that once again, I've had my kids, I've had them for 2 years, sometimes 3 years. And a lot of the things that I know the teachers I talk to all the time is they won't unmute and talk in front of the whole class. But what we do at the end of class and our principal, we're kind of 30, 30, 30, we're in 90-minute blocks. And so 30 minutes is instruction, 30 minutes they're working on their own, and then 30 minutes we're just on Zoom and they pop in to ask questions. And I just hang out and I'll say, hey, why don't, Mike, Jenny, whoever, stay after class and talk to me for a minute. And it's simply just, it can be a 1-minute conversation. How is everything going? I see that you've done this. You're a junior, you're a senior. What are you going to do next year? Have you, and all these different things, and or because I've known them for so long, how's baseball? How's soccer? I know the last year you were doing this, are you still doing that? And you can get a lot of feedback from them. And if they feel connected, which because I've had them for so many years, they feel connected to me. So my participation rate and kids showing up in attendance is probably a lot higher than most because they know me and they know that I'm not going to keep them on there for 90 minutes prattling on about something. So it's just a simple relationship.
Yeah, I think that is so the case, that idea of just having really close relationships. And I think it is hard right now, and kind of thinking about this. I have a kindergartner this year. He's never met his teacher in person. She has no idea what he would be like if he was, right? She has nothing to compare him to as like what's a good day and what's a bad day necessarily. So I think having that advantage of having those close relationships is so incredibly important. So we're getting close to time. So I want to make sure that we touch on one other kind of big topic. As we've kind of been navigating the craziness that was 2020 and that has seemed to follow us in 2021, we've really been dealing with 2 significant pandemics. And major issues in our country. Not only have we been dealing with COVID and the loss of life that has created for so many families, but the other issue that we've really been struggling with in Kentucky and all over the country are the severe issues of racism and just general injustice that our kiddos are having to experience. And it's incredibly difficult to have those conversations in person. It's really difficult to have those conversations via Zoom, and when people are living that. And, you know, Ebony, when you mentioned, you know, a kid that had lost his older brother, I have no idea if that was an issue related to gun violence or things like that. But even in Fayette County, we've been having a ton of loss of life of teens related to violence. And so I'm curious, how do you guys talk about that with your families in the classroom? And if you have tips for how we can do that a little bit better, because I think hopefully most of us want to do that a little bit better.
Well, so in Fayette County, we are a majority minority district. And with that said, though, we now have a board that's 5 white people. And so with the election turnover, and we also went from having a Black superintendent to now we're in the middle of a superintendent search. So we've really lost our minority representation. And so one of the things that I challenged or have asked my colleagues to do, because I think we really set the tone, is I have asked that we do a unconscious bias and diversity training within the first 30 days, and that we're intentional and that we continue to do ongoing training over the next 2 years, as long as this board does not look like the students that we represent. And I think we need to be really aware of that, and that we need to be aware of that as we go into the superintendent search. I also have made sure that the RFP for executive search firms or for the recruiting agency says very clearly the expectation is that we want a slate of candidates that mirrors the image of our students. And so that is really an important thing, and that is a non-negotiable. So we're really trying to set the tone. You know, I think, you know, I'm unique because I'm the minority in my house. My partner is a Black male and my children are all Black. And so, you know, when you talk about how you talk about a house, we have to talk about it in our house. Like, it is a conversation every day. What I need is for everybody's house to have it as an everyday conversation. And that is hard to have. And, you know, some of my friends, you know, say, well, how do I introduce this? Well, I didn't get to introduce this. You know, I live in an upper class neighborhood, and my son was playing outside a few weeks ago, and someone yelled out their car, white power at him. You know, and he didn't know what they were. He just looked at me like, what are, you know, they're crazy. But I mean, he's 6, you know, and this is happening. And, you know, they do see the issues. They do have to confront the issues. My 10-year-old is very aware that she gets in trouble. Like, we were at a pool a couple summers ago, members of a pool, that the lifeguards called on her anytime the kids were horse playing. She was always the first one called out. And she really was self-aware of that. And she was maybe 7 or 8 at that time. So it is a conversation I have to have in my house. And so how do we get that out? And so as a board, for me, it's really important that we're having this at the top level. Another thing is, you know, I really push for diverse slates of teachers in the schools. And so, but it's kind of the way the organizational structure is set up. It's a little difficult to do. So as a district, we've really worked on recruiting minorities into the pool. And then we've really increased the number of minority principals in the district to really just continue to set that tone. And it's interesting, when I asked my colleagues to do that for the school board, for the inclusivity training and the unconscious bias training, one of the principal search committees came forward and asked if they could do the same training. So it sets that tone, and you just kind of have to know where you are and what can you do to make an impact.
We need more Stephanies in the world. So in my personal opinion, you know, I echo the same thing that Stephanie said. You know, at our school, we serve predominantly African-American and Hispanic students. So, you know, the conversation's happening. It's happening with our families. And, you know, it's just a part of everyday life. And so to make it a part of everyday life for everyone else is really where the push has to be. And having allies such as Stephanie kind of, make sure that this is at the forefront of everybody's agenda, at the forefront of everybody's mind, and that these conversations are happening in every household and not just the Black ones is really what we have to begin to imagine as a new normal way to have a conversation about race and all of the other differences that exist across the world. And so, so we're a middle school. We pride ourselves in being able to grant our families access to quality education, which includes a lot of Catholic high schools here in Louisville. And so we're sending our students into environments where, much like what Stephanie's young child experienced, racial slurs, inequitable treatment, and just, racism, macroaggressions, not micro, they're pretty big. So I think that what I have done over time is really, and especially in working with one of the Catholic high schools here in Louisville, encourage them to bring people in to help them have these conversations, because it's not easy if you've never had these conversations before. And so to equip them with tools to be able to have these conversations is first and foremost something that we should all, really think about. Whether there's a book or, an article to read. If you don't have the resource to pay someone to come in and talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, there's a plethora of webinars and other online tools that could support you in having these conversations. It's interesting because, to the person who yelled out white power to Stephanie's child, you could tell that conversation didn't happen with that family. And so, how do we begin to educate our young people, just about the ills of the world so that they could, try to heal the world. And so I think that's where we all have to be, is at a place of healing and understanding that it's not okay to not see color or to just say that I'm not racist, but to really lean into anti-racism, because, if we all don't collectively stand against racism, then we are silently, standing by it and allowing it to continue on. So this is the day and age for these conversations to increase and to know and feel comfortable having them. And I think that it's okay not to know, and I think that we've been able to have conversations with teachers, in our Catholic high schools that say it's okay that you don't have all of the answers, but to neglect the conversation is just as detrimental as just, allowing it to continue. So.
Ebony, I'm glad you said that. As a white male in a classroom that I teach Microsoft and Adobe software, it is very, very difficult for me to talk about racism. And you never know what you're going to say somebody might take in the wrong way. And all of a sudden it's getting fired back on you when you thought you were just having an innocent conversation, teaching moment with somebody. And it's very difficult, and I'm sure I'm not alone with a lot of teachers. We really don't know how to have, if it's not in our curriculum, to have that conversation with our kids. Now, if I have one kid come to me and say, hey, Mr. Jenkins, I'm having this issue, then I can talk it out with them. But running a whole class and discussing race is, opening up a box that, I don't feel truly qualified to be able to handle. So, suggesting that you'd have somebody that could come in. And I know Dunbar, we had a few years ago, we had a guy come in and speak to the whole school at one time. Now, awesome speaker, I paid attention. When you're talking in the gymnasium to 2,500 students, every one of us has sat in an auditorium in some sort of class, pep rally, whatever, and you have the students pay attention, maybe 10% of them paying attention. and is absolutely awesome. And at a smaller scale of that would probably work a lot better, that you maybe have 1 or 2 classes at a time. That somebody that is trained in how to talk about that and answer questions in the correct manner.
So I know we're wrapping up, but I just want to say just a couple of more things. So first of all, you don't have to be qualified to have a conversation about any topic, right? Sometimes it is a matter of just, knowing the difference between right and wrong, like at the end of the day, certain things just, we got to stamp it. We got to call it what it is. And I think that, being honest with whoever you're in conversation with, students or your neighbors or anybody, I think that it is okay to say, listen, I don't have all the answers and I may mess this up, but, we should probably have a conversation about how this is impacting, people that don't look like us. For those who have been experiencing racism ever since they were born. And so, it's really a matter of, being comfortable and knowing the difference between right and wrong. And sometimes it is about recognizing your own values, right? And sharing that value with someone else. If you value human life, if you value, having a difference of opinion, whether that's of thought, socioeconomic status, East versus West, Lexington versus Louisville. It's just a matter of, entering into those difficult conversations. And I probably find it more difficult to have a conversation about UK versus U of L than I do about black and white. And so, it's just a matter of getting comfortable with knowing that it's okay. We don't know all of the answers either, but we've been required to be experts, representing everything Black, for a very long time. And so there are a few books that I know have been very helpful in having dialogue and conversations. So right now I'm engaged with Sacred Heart Academy doing, so you call yourself a anti-racist, Ibram Kendi. There are a few other books, so many. The Color of Law, and I'm happy to send like a whole book list, because a part of that also, Chet, is, we need to educate ourselves before we try to educate others. And so sometimes it is a matter of just, like I said, reading an article, read a book, kind of dive into what some of these, issues are that are happening across the country. And there's some pretty awesome stuff happening. Look, Stephanie's holding up one right now.
Yeah, so I like this book. This is actually when Superintendent Cott came to the district, he had everybody read this about it's called Beyond the Bake Sale, The Essential Guide to Family School Partnerships. But it dives into some of these issues, and it talks about how principals, for example, should work with their staff to give you all a safe space to interact and talk about your fears about. And it's one of the fears that you mentioned is, what if I don't broach the subject correctly? What if I cause a bigger issue? And so really starting that dialogue amongst your colleagues, and then being able to really bring it out into the classroom. But yes, this is not necessarily a book about racism, but it's about partnerships. And so I think it's really a strong book that I recommend. And I'm rereading now as we're going through a new superintendent search.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. And what we can do is we can get in touch with you, Stephanie and Ebony, and kind of compile some more resources to add to the follow-up email that we're going to send out to everyone, if that's okay with the two of you. I feel like we could have continued on for like another half an hour, 45 minutes with this, because this is such a great conversation. So thank you so much to Ebony, Stephanie, Sydney, Chelsea, Chet, and Tanya. Thank you so much for moderating, facilitating, whichever one it is today. You did such a fantastic job, and this was a great discussion. And then thank you to everyone else who was able to join us today. As I said, we will send up a follow-up email that will include a recording from today's forum, and then also any additional resources that we have. And as soon as that Connect brochure is ready to share and the website is up and going, we will make sure that we send that out to you all as well. So again, thanks for joining, and have a great rest of your day.